Yeah, of course.
Thank you. Classic class. Tina Trip.
Take our name first.
It's on. Yep.
Wait, you guys can sound.
I did. That's freaky. Dateable.
Oh shoot, twice. It's in my bag.
I ask you to switch off mobile phones, right? I guess you have it, but I just, just in case you have forgotten. And, just be nice and not too many fast during speeches, right? So, as little disruption as possible would be really appreciated. Thank you for your understanding. Yes.
Is it okay if I film? I turn it on silent and it's not going to make any sense.
Okay. Silent, yeah.
Yes, silent.
Switching off is too much to say, too drastic.
Yes, understood. Yes, of course.
Rectification.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I think we'll. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, it gives me great pleasure to declare
This side.
and with the floor of the citizens of the
Ladies and gentlemen, in our effort to bring more power to ourselves, we are still unable to let go of the era of colonialism, and we think that it is time to give back the voice we've stolen from the indigenous communities. We value the right of every single individual to sustain their own culture, to practice your identity that gives you your self-worth, to manage in schools and to learn to function in the society that you want to live in. So because of this reason, we think that the state should always fund the schools that if the indigenous people choose to have their own communities and have their own autonomy. But notice that the communities we talk about already want to be secluded from the society. If those communities wanted to go to public schools, wanted to be integrated with the rest of the society, they would already do so, and those are not the communities that we are talking about. What we are talking about is the right, if you want to choose to be autonomous, if you want to choose to have your very own community, then in that case, you should have every single possibility to educate your children, to preserve your culture, and be in a way, live in a way that you yourself want to. No, thank you. In my speech, I want to talk about two things. Firstly, why it is principally justified that the state should always fund the state should always fund the schools if the indigenous people choose to have their own autonomous curriculums. Well, thank you. But secondly, why it is also practically better and the state is fulfilling its duty in providing education better on our side. But starting with justification, two things under this. Firstly, I'm going to talk about why these people always have the right to cultural autonomy and why this translates into the need for public funding. We already support, in many cases, the right to autonomy of indigenous communities. For example, in the US, we already have reserves where those indigenous people can have their own legislation and they don't need to follow the rules of the convention or general public everything. So we think that this is the principle of autonomy we support. Because the reason why they have this autonomy is because they are just so fundamentally different that they are unable to live in the society, or they at least choose to not live in the general society, as they are very not accustomed to. Why is this the case? Because what forced integration means is that it is always going to be a trade-off between your own culture and being integrated. There exists systematic racism and discrimination, which always is going to force the indigenous people to hide their own community, to take back or not to be as cultural as they want to be, if they wanted to be integrated into the society. We think that it is your right to choose whether you want to be a part of the society or not. We say that it always is a legitimate choice of those people, no thank you, to go out in the society and be integrated with the rest of the population. However, if you choose not to do so, we think that it's very harmful if we force it upon you. The reason for that is that those people are always going to feel very bad because their identity is being delegitimized. The state is actively saying that they have, in order to be a part of the society, they have to give away what makes them, what makes their community unique to them, and what gives them their personal identity. And we think that this is a trade-off that can be a choice, but should actually never be forced upon this. And because, no thank you, they have this right to autonomy, we also need to provide them funding. Because the forced choice is always going to be so damaging, the kids going to public schools or being part of the general public education system is never going to be a legitimate option for them because they're forced to trade off something that is so crucial to them, which is their identity. And because the state has already taken a duty to offer every single person an education, then in a case where the conventional educational system is completely incompatible and forces you to an extreme trade-off, then we think that the state has an obligation to provide you with an alternative that actually matches your needs and actually allows you to educate yourself. But furthermore, we think that we need to, also protect the principle of reparations. The state has been able to build itself up at the expense of indigenous people. We have taken away their land, we have taken away their resources, compromising their possibilities to self-sustainability. We have taken away their right to feel good in our society through systematic discrimination and saying their culture is not legitimate and saying that they aren't as good as every other part of this, which means that we have taken away their right to live in our society as a part of it. But we think that education is a key aspect of discrimination that we have always forced upon them. Firstly, we have denied them autonomy previously, saying that they cannot have a choice over the way they want to practice their education. But furthermore, we can't give that the schools in those communities will always statistically be worse than in every other region. So we think that education is a way in which we have caused very significant damage to them. So because of this, we think that because we have caused their lack of self-sustainability, we think that the appropriate reparation that we need to provide is actually this public funding for this education. Why is this the case? Firstly, we think that we have taken away their right to practice their culture, and we think that education is a crucial way in which they can sustain their own culture. For example, having education guarantees that the future generations are aware of the traditions, are aware of the language, are aware of the dances, are aware of the important historical figures in your community, and we think that this is a crucial way in which those people can preserve their very unique heritage that they deserve, and their own identities preserved. But furthermore, we have taken away their financial sustainability. We have taken away something that allows them to become better in the future, education that gives them a possibility to become better and to have a future. And because of this reason, we need to provide them funding that will allow them to become self-sustainable or more sustainable in the future. So we think that this is a very appropriate reparation that we need to provide them, and hence it is justified. But before moving on to my second point, I take your point.
There are numerous other ways that indigenous communities can preserve culture, such as in the spheres of their homes or the engagement in community festivals. Why is it not then more important to guarantee that schools are an economic sphere to aid in another very important goal of life, being mobility?
We think that the reason why they cannot practice their culture in any other ways is the dominant culture is, by its name, very dominant. They cannot actually practice their culture when they're going to schools, where they're every single day they're being reminded that their identity is not important. They might practice at home, but when every single person in your school is saying that your identity is not legitimate, your culture is not legitimate, they cannot practice that. And we think that the point about integration doesn't stand. Those are communities that don't want to be integrated. The reason why we're already granting autonomy is because we think that they have a right to decline integration, and because of this we think that they also have a right to preserve their identity and to preserve, to preserve their culture that is making them that. But going to my second argument, why this is practically better. As I already said, those are people who want to live in seclusion. For this reason, they're always going to go to schools that are their own community ones. And we think that in a underfunding them, they're always going to be very bad because they don't have enough finances because we have taken away all of their resources. In a case where the state will actually fund this, we think that they could actually make this education better. They could buy better books, hire better teachers, all of these mechanisms that are going to also provide better education for them on our side of the house. If they want to have integration, then we think that they need to have good education for that. We think that parents also want their kids to have, I don't know, sustainable futures. So in a way where they have the finances to provide better education and in ways that the kids are actually going to learn, it's going to be better on our side, and maybe in the future they might also be integrated if the kids want to do so. We think that they will never manage to be in general public schools. It is very hard for them to understand. They don't want to, or they cannot simply understand the practice when in history classes they're being told of America being founded, but their tribes have lived thousands of years there. We think that they don't just sit down, maybe they don't understand the language, the relationships between people, but furthermore they're constantly being discriminated and think that they have less right to be there. So we think that because of the historical oppression, the kids will never exist in that. The function of education is for you to be able to live in a society. If you have chosen to live in a different society, then the education should also cater to that purpose of living in that society. For those reasons, no proposition.
I think that's built.
Right when they say that the mark of colonialism still exists. Because colonialism was about forcing these individuals into the worst lands, taking all of their resources and forcing them to lead worse conditions. On side opposition, we say they perpetuate that same kind of mindset when you lock individuals within these communities to underfunded schools that are divided and don't provide the skills necessary for the economic mobility we think is most important in this round. I'm going to talk about two constructive arguments in this speech. First of all, why you're likely going to get very poor quality of education and why that's so important in this debate. And second of all, why it's worse for integration and achieving long-term rights for indigenous individuals. Before that, I just want to talk about generally our stance on side opposition and some refutation of side proposition. First of all, we just negate the fact that all of these communities necessarily want to stay excluded, especially given the fact that we were going to prove to you down the case why standards within those communities are incredibly bad. We support policies like busing, where you can redirect funding to good mainstream schools that are nearby within the community with both non-indigenous peoples and indigenous peoples. We think that usually indigenous communities are pretty close to cities or other non-indigenous communities, given that that's the way you can have effective distribution of government aid. So we support in those schools indigenous culture electives, so within mainstream schools we're able to get that. Given that Proposition's case never proved why you need exclusive, separate, full autonomy over your curriculum, I think we can get a lot of benefits of culture being an elective and prove why that mainstream school curriculum is necessary to focus on mainstream standards. So on to the second constructive argument that Proposition gave to you, which was about the right to culture. I want to first note that their conception of this debate is incredibly limited. So they essentially say we support this policy in cases where communities want to be secluded and want their own communities. But that means that they're essentially supporting this policy only in cases where communities want this policy. So they need to necessarily defend why we would also have this for communities that don't want to necessarily be excluded. We think their right to culture is relatively common, and it is quite offensive to say that they always want to be systematically excluded, given that they're often forced into worse conditions within these communities. We want to say that these schools and mainstream schools are not as awful as they'd like to say, given that we can also have alternatives like electives with indigenous schools and indigenous languages, and also because we've seen historically a lot of diaspora immigrants able to claim their culture within mainstream schools as well. They never explain why institutionalizing, having that school curriculum dedicated fully to your culture is necessary to retain that, especially because we think culture is something that grows outside of school as well, within your family, within networks. That can't necessarily be the case, where school is also a lot of the times about foundational skills that they would necessarily neglect on their side. Wait, we think their final argument about reparations is really dependent on them proving that you actually get a better quality of life for these individuals. In fact, we think it gets worse, so we prove that you failed their obligation to help these individuals. So on to the first constructive argument about why you're likely going to get poor quality of education. First, I want to establish why these schools will likely be systematically underfunded. The If we can't even see in the status quo being able to get good drinking water systems in these communities, it is very unclear whether you're going to be able to fund up a whole system of education adequately and provide the resources necessary. This is absolutely crucial because there's often a perception within mainstream society that colonialism has ended, that the past is past, and that these communities don't deserve these special privileges, so they don't want to use their tax dollars extensively to fund these schools. That is why it is very likely you'll get very little resources, which are absolutely essential to establish good education, to have good teachers, to have the books necessary, to have things like extracurriculars like debating that we all value in this case. Contrast that to our side of the house when we're able to integrate indigenous individuals within mainstream schools. There's a lot more political will within those areas when you as a white individual benefit from those schools getting better. So we're likely going to get far better education on our side of the house. On their side, they have less robust curriculums and foundational skills. Because in order for proposition to get their maximum benefits, they need these curriculums to be as divergent and distinct from mainstream curriculum as possible. So they need to diverge as much and focus as much on culture as they'd like to say. That comes at the cost of focusing on foundational skills like English language, like mathematics, like sciences, which are absolutely necessary for leading long-term lives and being able to access higher education. But even if they're able to prove that they can fund these schools well, we think it is very unlikely that mainstream society will recognize these schools as legitimate. And this is absolutely crucial. The reason why we have standardized and mainstream curriculums is because employers and universities want to know that there's some base level of knowledge and skills that you possess. But with your benefits, they're going to have completely different curriculums that are under full autonomy of indigenous communities, all of which are not very socially accepted. I don't think many individuals believe or understand the significance of the different kinds of curriculum choices that they're going to make. This is extremely harmful because acceptance within mainstream society is absolutely necessary for long-term mobility. You can't just exclude these communities forever within these worst conditions and these squalors. You need to be able to get better university acceptances, employers recognizing the legitimacy of the high school education you get in order to actually be able to afford anything at all. So even if we believe that culture is necessarily important, you need to be able to have basic economic mobility to be able to preserve that culture. You can't preserve that culture when you aren't able to access a job or employment because everyone believes the types of education you got didn't focus on the right skills and were not legitimately adhering to mainstream standards. So we've proven to you in this argument why the quality of education, even for those cultural benefits, are likely going to be very bad, but even in their best case, if they can get good funding, why still the perception of these schools being fundamentally different and inferior means that people are locked out of the best kinds of economic opportunities. Yeah.
We are protecting the right of those communities to choose whether they want to be integrated with their education or not. It is your burden to prove why in autonomous regions they shouldn't have public funding for schools.
This second argument is going to prove to you why even if you give them that choice, why you limit that choice at the point where you solidify the fact that they have to stay within these communities and attend those schools, so you reduce choice on their side. This argument, the second argument, is about why it's worse for integration and long-term rights. I want to first talk about why you just get less integration overall. So, because these schools necessarily need to be within reserves and concentrated communities of indigenous peoples, it is very unlikely that you get non-indigenous peoples to go to these schools. And moreover, and most importantly to deal with that POI, fewer indigenous schools go to mainstream schools and choose to leave their community. This is because you feel significant pressure to stay within these communities at the point when your parents are telling you you need to learn your own culture, when everyone else is telling you that it's more convenient to stay right here within the worst conditions that you have to go. And the perceived convenience means you lock these people within these communities. That's incredibly bad because you leave indigenous peoples to be out of sight, out of mind. You lock them in reserves, and most importantly, don't forget the kinds of integration that we think is necessary for people to actually believe in funding these communities in the first place. You're less likely to get that kind of interaction where a young indigenous boy and a non-indigenous boy are talking in school about the kinds of historical depression, discrimination they face. That's actually crucial because if they want to benefit them in terms of being able to vote for drinking water, all the other kinds of policies and funding, they need people in mainstream society to actually accept them and believe that their cause is legitimate. When you isolate them, nobody sees them anymore. Nobody believes their cause is important, which in the long run not only reduces the efficacy of their case, but also prevents their ability to get better conditions and rights for them overall. We think also indigenous cultural teachings are less likely to be in the mainstream, because you can't just have a language surviving with 100 people within your insular community understanding it. We think you're less likely to get indigenous electives within mainstream schools when people believe that culture is already being represented in indigenous schools. That's incredibly harmful because in order to preserve your culture, you need to make sure other people understand the importance and value of it as well. But you reduce that on their side of the house when everyone believes that the indigenous peoples have their cultures, they have their schools, we don't want them within our own electives. That's incredibly harmful, not only for culture, but for the mobility and improved perception for indigenous communities. We're very proud of them.
Speakers quote for 8 minutes and 24 seconds. 824, please.
Starts their case by saying that our side is maintaining the legacy of colonialism. Notice that colonialism was fundamentally about not giving a choice for these indigenous communities, choosing for themselves, telling them what their life is going to look like, and forcing them to be subject to the abuse of white communities. We protect the right for these communities to choose, and we agree that not all communities want to use this right. Their case might be true for many communities, and we think that these communities will then choose to go to these other schools and not want to have these community schools. They completely miss our case because we have told you explicitly that not all communities want to use this right, but those who want to should always be able to obtain and receive the right that they have for cultural representation and for their culture to be able to be sustained. In my speech, first we're running through 2 arguments, then moving on to 2 points here. We're thinking firstly about the justification, then secondly talking about the quality of the schools, and then finally we're going to extend on telling you why these communities specifically are better at making these choices than the states ever could be. No, thank you. Firstly, they tell you that we can't fund up enough money to give these people clean drinking water, then however, how could we ever give these communities enough money to have good schools? Firstly, I think that this is in tension with their whole frame, basically, when they say that these communities are able to get enough political capital or social capital to have electives in these big state schools, and for the state schools to cater more to these communities. Moreover, they tell how the state can help these communities in other ways, therefore I don't understand why this could be impossible to do on our side. But moreover, I think that this debate assumes that we care about these communities in the first place. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this debate about whether these communities should have more sustainability or more autonomy. Anyway, we are willing to give as much of these schools as we are giving to other schools, because we are already publicly funding these other schools, and we would therefore publicly fund these schools to the same extent. This debate wouldn't be happening if their first argument was true in the first place. No, thank you. But they may tell us about how these schools will never be recognized. Firstly, I think that many private schools are quite similar to their sites, so they then ban all private schools or not let them exist. They also have different curricula, and many of these private schools are already widely recognized, or even recognized to a higher degree in many states as compared to state schools. But moreover, I think that these communities itself want to have some chance of success for the members of these communities. They wouldn't want to give them no opportunity of having a general education or these basic knowledge that they describe to you. Probably they would want to give them these types of curriculum as well, but simply tie it along with their history or their practices. This doesn't make sense to me that none of these students would be unable to take the SAT, for example. They probably still can, probably still would have the chance to go to some community college, etc. I don't understand why they would necessarily have the chance on their side, getting more into that more later. But moreover, I think that it's better if we don't force them to choose any type of education and they don't truly engage with our case like throughout their whole speech. Because even if this argument is true, then these communities who want to have a better level of education would go towards that better level of education. They don't prove to you why that's true. Now, their final argument about how these makes these indigenous communities less important. No, thank you. I would first want to ask whether they would also remove reserves that we currently have for these people already in the first place for them to be able to protect their culture. Because if they are willing to go as far as saying that communities fundamentally keep these people back, then I think that they would have to prove that to you on their side. They would disrupt these communities because these communities take these people away from the general society, and the general society is more important. They need to then make that argument about why what they think is best for these communities is more true than what these communities or these people themselves think is best for them. I think that that's a very high burden for opposition to prove in this debate. But moreover, if they say that they stay home, if they say that they stay in these communities always because some kind of pressure exists, and this is again in tension with the things that they tell you, how homes can also give this culture, which would also prove to you that under their side as well, these people would be stuck in these communities. So they can't really give you a framework of homes are giving these people culture, but aren't keeping them in these places, but schools are keeping them in these places. So they try to tell you that home equals school in giving these people culture. Their argument is in tension with the rebuttal they try to make to you. But finally, this is only true for this community, only true for the communities that want to be secluded in the first place. We think that it's fine for these communities to be secluded. Therefore, this argument has no impact in this debate. Before going on, go.
Given that reserves are a colonial invention, there are very few people who actually want to stay there. The problem is, a lot of people want to access other opportunities outside of reserves, but they lack the opportunity to do so. We can use that funding to get things like busing under our side of the house.
Okay, firstly, it's still in tension with the fact that you say that these homes would then also be keeping these people in these communities or would be letting them out. But moreover, show me the majority of indigenous communities who say that they want to be only in general society, that they don't want to protect their culture, even though my nation doesn't have indigenous communities. I think that, for example, an indigenous spokesperson was able to get into American Congress. It's very explicit telling you about the rights of these preserves. Now these people should be able to protect their cultural autonomy and their cultural heritage. Their argument doesn't really tell you anything about these communities, only about their perspective. Now on the point about justification. Their POI that they asked our first speaker about how schools provide social mobility completely disregards the frame that we provided you in this argument. Because notice that their first POI explicitly agrees to how these people are forced to make a trade-off between culture and integration. Otherwise, they never would make that POI because they would be willing to say that schools can offer integration even in instances where these schools don't exist in these communities. At the point at which they make that POI, they explicitly tell you that these people can get social mobility only if they give away their culture. We think that we shouldn't force these people to give away their culture, but should give them the right to choose which part is more important to them. They fundamentally take this right away from them. But moreover, then they then tell you that if the separation argument is unimportant, it relies on practice. We have told you how specifically we took away their agency and we are now giving it back. We think that it's fine if it doesn't even have positive practical implications, because firstly, these communities choose for themselves, but moreover, we fundamentally give them the agency back, which is what we stole from these communities. Therefore, we're fulfilling the duty of reparation, even without practical implications. On the point about practice and purpose of education, firstly, they tell you that culture can be an elective. This is quite a big rebuttal. This is a general way of teaching is still in contradiction with the mindset of these students, as our first speaker told you. Being said about how America was found in 1492 is in contradiction with the way that your tribe describes this issue, and therefore this purpose of education is not fulfilled for these people. But moreover, they don't respond to the fact that these people would be pushed out under their side from these general schools because of the reason that they are different, because of their homes have given them a different upbringing in practices and in language and in customs. All of these things would exist under their side, and these people would be unable to get full education. Finally, my point about parental autonomy. Why this argument is important in this debate is that we recognize the fact that these kids are not going to be able to make these choices. Therefore, we think that these parents are always the ones who should be able to make that choice, and under their side, these parents can't really do that. Firstly, why do parents have the right to choose? We think that family is a separate unit from the state, that the state doesn't dictate decisions in that unit because it doesn't exist in that unit. Parents already make choices about child's education, healthcare, and lifestyle because these are specifically these unit-based issues, and the state has nothing to do with them. Parental autonomy is especially important in evaluating risks, because the harm is always on the line when evaluating risks, and the damage influences the family the most in instances where this happens. The risks are always felt by the family. And the risks have been brought out in our Prop 1 speech where we tell you about the abuse and bullying in those schools, the fact that they drop out of high school because they're unable to actually fulfill the purpose of education or the function of education. The state is always first making these decisions for three reasons. Firstly, the state has less information about that child and what they actually know, what are this child's abilities. Secondly, they're worse at prioritizing the needs of this child, knowing what's important for that child and what might be important for that child in the future. As this is especially true when discussing the indigenous communities, where the state never has this type of perspective that these families have. But moreover, the state has less incentive to make the right choice for that child who they are putting into school because they don't feel the risks, as I crucially told you earlier. Even if some parents make a bad decision for their child, then more children would be better off under our side. The state must give parents the right to decide under the best framework, which is something that only we do in this debate, but they give these parents a bad choice and a bad choice. For these reasons proposed.
Speaker spoke for 8 minutes and 22 seconds. 822.
On Team Canada, we come from the country that has systematically failed its Indigenous peoples to the largest extent in the world. The reserve system in our country is one that serves to lock Indigenous peoples out of opportunities. It is one that is systematically underfunded, not because we can't just push money into those reserves, but because of the way that governments allocate resources to reserves. And that's something that Proposition can never fix on their side of the house. I'm going to do a number of things in this speech. First, I want to clarify a few premises about this debate. Then I want to talk about the round through two questions. First, which model of funding and model of schools is better? Second, which is better for the lives of Indigenous peoples in the long run? The first thing I want to clarify about this round, and something I think that Team Estonia is still genuinely confused about, is that this is not a round about whether or not we should fund schools for Indigenous peoples. On both sides of the House, that is clearly going to happen. This is a debate about what model of education should exist for Indigenous peoples, about whether or not there should be curricular control, organizational control, and funding control for these groups, and what the effects of that is. Team Estonia has yet to give us a single line of analysis in this round about what these curriculums would start to look like, but what these schools would start to look like with Indigenous control. This is not that these schools will be poorly controlled because Indigenous people are inherently inferior, but it's about the ways that society has structurally oppressed these individuals, which render this kind of model poor for societies. That's the first thing I want to clarify, and something that Estonia will need to engage with if they want to win this round. But the second thing that I then want to note is the premise of choice. Because the argument that Team Estonia makes here is that we should build these schools so that parents have the ability to choose whether or not they want to send their child to a school on reserve, or whether or not they want to send their child to somewhere off reserve. But this argument about choice is directly tense, and I'll engage now with our argument on choice. Because the reality is that in the status quo, there are funded schools on reserves in every single case, because that is a legal obligation that governments have. The problem is that on both sides of the House, the availability and provision of education is poor. Schools on reserves are underfunded, and we acknowledge this, but the schools off reserve, which genuinely give opportunities to individuals, are not available to Indigenous students because they don't have the ability to be bused to those schools, because their parents don't even have the ability to send them to those schools because of laws that prohibit it. What we told you from the get-go on side opposition is that is something that is abhorrent and something we want to fix on our side of the House. That the real solution is not to divert more money into a failing system of reserves, but rather to help Indigenous people get out of the colonial vestiges of the reserve system and gain economic empowerment. That's something that we uniquely offer to you on our side of the House. And then they had quite an offensive line, actually, from Team Estonia, which is basically, look, Indigenous people choose to stay on reserves. They choose to stay in areas that in Canada and Australia do not have drinking water and no transport links. They choose to stay there because of their cultures. That is absurd and ridiculous, and speaks to a lack of examples that we've yet to hear from their side of the House. The reality is that these people don't choose. They don't have the option available to leave in the status quo. They don't have the ability to go to those schools and gain economic empowerment, and they most certainly are not allowed the legal power in many countries to move out of those reserves and into cities. That is something we said from the get-go we want to ameliorate on our side of the House. Let's talk then about the model of funding and why it gets worse on their side of the House. We gave you a number of mechanisms for why this is the case. Realize that in this round we have a set amount of money that is political capital that we can allocate. The question is, on which side of the House is that money going to stretch the furthest? What we told you on our side of the House is, look, we have this money that we can invest in rural schools that presently exist all around the world, invest it in both the education for everyone, which will gain significantly more political capital, because guess what? The white people are the ones that go to those schools, and they want their kids to get an education as well. And we can still preserve, of course, electives in those schools, but that wasn't really the argument we made. We told you that it's indigenous people on reserves who are best at teaching about culture, not the underfunded schools that profits like didn't give. And therefore, even if you believe that culture is the defining factor in this round, we're still winning on that. Then let's talk about the different model of long-term development. What Prof failed to recognize is that reserves are not something that indigenous people chose. In reality, and this is very important for the historical context of this round, reserves were made by Canadian, American government, they were made by New Zealand and Australian government as a means to get indigenous people away from the white people in the cities. They put them on reserves because they wanted them out of sight and out of mind. And those reserves have continued to this day. They lock them out of political control, they lock them out of economic control, so the countries can just forget about it and go on with their national pride. We provide unique mechanisms to stop that on our side of the house. Yeah.
Your first speaker says very clearly how these reserves are close to very big schools, very big cities where these people could go to. How hard is it then exactly to escape these reserves, and why are all people then staying there if it's so easy to do?
Over 70% of indigenous people in Canada don't own cars or have transport links to those areas because busing is not available in these circumstances for the vast majority of cases, and because it's not even legally available for them to go to a school out of the district. We solve all of that on our side of the house. There's a direct trade-off in this round between investing more in control over these schools on reserve versus investing in control outside of reserve. That's something we've told you and they still haven't engaged with from their side of the house. Okay, so then I just want to discuss the long-term economic empowerment of these individuals, because we told you that choice is contingent on a number of things. First of all, it is contingent on the availability of that choice. Even in the case where schools are worse on reserves, the reality is that a lot of indigenous people will be forced to still go to those schools because they don't have access to schools outside of those reserves, because they're not even legally allowed because of zoning and district laws. That's something we solve. Okay, so let's talk then about what Angela told you and what we still have yet to hear a response to. She told you that the real counterfactual in this round is allowing indigenous people to get recognition. That because of the structural discrimination that exists in this debate to indigenous people, that their schools, which have curricular control for indigenous people, that have full funding and operational control, will be structurally undervalued. That universities and high school in the deeply racist countries towards indigenous people are not going to value these qualifications. And that in order for their side to get the benefit of culture, they might actually have to deny access to some of the things that are most important. Would you rather have an additional 2 hours of language classes or the ability to get AP courses on their side of the house so people can get to university? That is the kind of trade-off that we present to you here, but why it is that control matters, not funding for schools that matters in this debate, and that's something that they're still missing in this round. But then we ultimately told you, and I'll get into the argument about culture right now because it's directly engaged with their claim here, that even if you think that culture is the single metric to which judges round, we win on culture. Here is why. The reason why their side of the house wants full curricular control for these schools is to guarantee things like language and cultural education. But we told you, and I'm going to tell you now, why that doesn't happen. A number of reasons. First, Estonia has completely ignored, no thank you, the way that indigenous people actually live. They don't live as single cluster tribes of 100 individuals. They live on massive reserves that were set aside by governments in discriminatory ways. What does this mean? Each reserve does not have a unique culture. In the vast majority of the world, each reserve has 10 or 20 bands that were pushed into land by governments, where there is significant political and cultural disagreement in these reserves about how they ought to be governed. Where in Australia, for example, single reserves will have up to 20 different bands. So then we ask propositions. If you want to give curricular control to these areas, which band is going to decide? Is it the band with the most people, the most political control, the ability to get the most concessions from white governments? We don't know in this debate, and Prof has not named yet a single indigenous group who could possibly even decide that in this round. And because of that, they lose even on culture, where the smaller bands that live in these allocated reserves lose out on the language education that they want. And not only have they lost out on that, but they've also lost out on the ability to go outside of reserve and get education, because guess what? Prof's taken the funding from there to put into their policy. Now those are the individuals who are locked out of choice. The non-dominant bands on 200 square kilometer reserves have no other options on their side. The most vulnerable of the most vulnerable are screwed over by Prof's policy here, and that's something that's absolutely abhorrent. Central American tribes with hybrid cultures, for example, will see a max level of infighting between the young and old, the old who want to preserve traditional languages, over that exact curricular control. This is an infighting that we cannot allow when indigenous people need to band together in order to fight off discriminatory government like our very own. We are so proud to oppose.
Ladies and gentlemen, we should leave the age of colonialism behind. Imposing our own social, economic and political structures on these people has been uniformly destructive to their communities. We, in proposition, are supporting the right of indigenous peoples to have these schools, the right to have these schools. We don't have to prove that all of these communities would want this, but that if these communities do want this, then we must provide it. We can protect things like busing because we, in proposition, protect choice. The fact that these communities should have a choice in how they want to actually live and in what sort of communities they want to live in. We also think that we should recognize that many people in these reserves have built a community in which they do actually want to live, and that this is the group that opposition ignores, but is most important in this debate. Groups who actually want an education, who want to have autonomous schools, to choose the way in which they live, to choose the education that their children deserve, but who opposition is denying this right. I want to talk about two things in this speech. Firstly, I'm going to look at whether these communities have a right to these schools, and then secondly, I'm going to look at what are the practical implications and how this will affect the students. But first of all, why do these communities have a right to these schools? We talked a lot about reparations in our first speech, and the response that we got from their first speech was that reparations are only valid if we prove exclusive benefits. We already said in our second speech that these communities deserve agency. We have taken away this agency from them. We have imposed our own structures upon them, and now we must give it back. No thank you. No response from their second speaker. The fact that we have taken away their agency to have their own structure of education and culture, for example, is already enough of a reason why we should give this autonomy back, no matter what the practical implications of that are. No thank you. But then secondly, they say that, okay, maybe we can just sort of provide some sort of cultural classes, and that they don't see why separate schools are necessary. But this also doesn't actually engage with our analysis. that indigenous students will feel alien in these state schools on two levels. Firstly, in regards to other students, the fact that they will always feel that they need to hide their cultural attributes to truly fit into these sort of communities. But this should never be a requirement if you want an education. We don't think that you need to hide your cultural attributes if you want an education. No, thank you. We don't think we should force this on them. But secondly, they will also feel alien in regards to the curriculum. Something we already pointed out in our first speech, the fact that in American schools you learn about how Columbus discovered America, which erases the identity and the history of these indigenous communities. It should be a right of these indigenous communities to not subscribe to this narrative, no thank you, the United States hold. They should have a right to also make their own curriculums and have their own narrative of what their communities actually had and what their history actually was. Third point. Our extension of parental autonomy, which got no response, is important in this debate. And it's important because it proves why the state can't make the best decision in regards to these students. The fact that if there is some sort of risk involved, that for example the child not actually coping with the overall environment of these schools, or the fact that they might have to hide their cultural attributes, no thank you, and the only agent who can decide whether this child should actually go to that school or not is the parent. This is important because in their second speech they said that we never proved which agent can actually decide best, but we already did that in our extension. We showed why the parents can always make the better decision. They will always have more information about these children, and they can prioritise what is actually most important for that child and for their family and for that community. For all of these reasons, we see that these communities have a right to these schools, even irrespective of what sort of practical benefits they get. But now, before I move on,
how do you break these problematic narratives and curriculums if you don't see indigenous people, if you don't engage with their cultures, and you don't get that interaction?
well, the problem is that under our side, we obviously at least achieve the benefit that in these schools, these indigenous peoples, at least they receive the education that is true to them. We don't think we can really truly say which narrative is always going to prevail, but we say that in these schools, at least these students will actually achieve this. But now, moving on to what are the actual practical implications of this debate? First of all, they say that we lock students into underfunded schools in their community, but we think that this also completely ignores our analysis that obviously we are the ones that are providing public funds to make these schools better. Now compare that to their case. The fact that some communities are obviously always going to feel that they want and need these schools, and in these cases, we think that they will have private schools with less funding, which means that all of the problems of having a worse education are going to be exacerbated and magnified, no thank you, in instances where we don't provide public funding to these communities, and in which they just have to build up their own schools. And in these instances, we think they will be much worse off than if we provided public funding. But secondly, they talk a lot about the fact that mainstream society is not accepting of these schools, and that, for example, employers won't accept them. As our second speaker already said first off, we already have all sorts of different schools, such as private schools, and we don't think that there will ever be an incentive for these schools to actually provide some sort of bad education. We think they will always include things like mathematics, and always will include the fact that the students can take an SAT. But secondly, what is important is that this is never in the incentive of these communities to fail at providing their students with an education. The fact that if there is more autonomy, there is always going to be an incentive to provide as good of an education as possible. This is a reason why these autonomy schools will have a much larger chance of being good schools than under the status quo, no thank you, where the average schools in these communities are of a subclass standard in regards to the overall average school standards of these overall countries, because the state doesn't have such an understanding of the cultural necessities, or maybe has perverse incentives to not really put resources into there because their fiscal capital is very small. We think that because under our side, as these communities are invested and engaged in providing the best education for their students, then this is the reason why under us we get better schools that is most suited for these students who are of these communities. Thirdly, they say that maybe people will also feel pressured to stay in these communities. Two responses. I think that firstly, probably this pressure is broadly the same as their own analysis proves. The fact that if people still practice their culture with their families and still live in their communities, I think that the overall pressure to stay in these communities is going to stay the same. Before I move on to my further point, I will just take a quick one.
Very simple question, because Prop never chose to model. Who decides the curriculum, how, and why are these schools respected more than the counterfactual economic development and success for indigenous people?
I think we've already said that these communities obviously decide what these curriculum of these schools are, and we've already proven why it's going to be an incentive of these schools to provide as good as an education as possible, and it's going to be an incentive of these schools to provide a bad economic situation. But also, this doesn't really engage with our analysis about choice. The fact that if it is in the interest of some sort of the family to ensure whatever economic benefits that they are talking about over the overall community, then they can obviously move. If we don't, we're not imposing these schools on anyone, which means we're also willing to clash. But back to the point, the fact that they say that people feel pressured into these communities. Now, lastly, I think we need to compare which harm is actually greater, whether the inability to leave a community or the inability to sustain your community. And we think that it's obviously easier to leave your community if you truly want, don't want to stay there. I think there's never going to be an impeding ability to leave your community if you don't want to stay there, if you want the benefits that opposition is talking about. But what is going to be much harder is being able to practice your culture or feel that your identity is as a point of pride in instances where you have been bullied or alienated in schools, where their customs and religions or practices have been seen as, for example, weird and they've been forced to hide them. In these instances, it's much harder to actually keep sustaining your community, keep feeling that your culture is a point of pride, and re-enter your community, or even feel that you need to re-enter your community. And this is much more destructive, and it's much more harder to re-enter your community than actually leave your community. For all of these reasons, please vote for Prop. Thank you.
Speakers spoke for 8 minutes and 30 seconds. 8:03.
Team Estonia's principle on this round was that we owe reparations to indigenous people. Our claim is that there is no value to restorative justice when the impacts of that are counterproductive to indigenous communities. When you're denied the ability to access a job because your school is not recognized by any university, when it is seen to be a curriculum that is weird and that is undignified. When you recolonize these schools, when you force the teaching of languages that are not from your community but from another tribe, as opposed to our counterfactual, where your parents, who they seem to care about, actually have control over the kind of culture that you have. In that case, the state actually becomes complicit in your suffering when we oppose that. I want to talk about 3 things in this speech. Firstly, I want to respond to their argument about parental autonomy. Secondly, I want to explain why our side is better for economic mobility, a vital theme in this round. And then thirdly, I want to explain why our side is actually better for the preservation of culture. Firstly, in terms of responses to parental autonomy, a couple things to say here. Number 1, they are not actually increasing the options for parents under their side of the house. As the second frames incredibly clearly, these schools exist under the status quo. We're simply changing their structure, so numerically speaking, the options are actually the same. But secondly, we see that parents have far more autonomy under our side of the house, as I flagged in my intro, when they have more control over how you can actually teach that kind of culture in your home, as opposed to when your kid is literally forced to learn the culture of another indigenous man, a claim that we gave in second, that went unresponded to. On the first question then, about which side is better for economic mobility, I want to start out here by doing a little bit of framing about why this theme is incredibly important. There are a couple pieces of weighing that I want to do here. Firstly, we see that when people are literally starving because they have no jobs, it's very, very hard to enjoy things like culture. It is a far more basic right because it impacts you substantially more viscerally. But secondly, individuals are unable to access the benefits of culture when they're structurally poor, a claim we gave from first. There are a few reasons for this. Firstly, because you actually need money to do things like fun community festivals, like potluck ceremonies, and enjoy those kinds of things. Secondly, if you have to work long hours in so many jobs because you literally lack food, you have no time to actually enjoy things like cultural celebration and teach those kind of languages. But thirdly, when you're continually stressed out because you know that you're going to go to bed every single night hungry, it's hard to actually enjoy things like culture, to find the kind of mental solace to bond with your family and your friends. So crucially, insofar as we win this theme, you're able to beat that argument about culture, even though I'm going to prove we win it at the end of this round. On economic mobility, the only offensive claim that they gave, no thank you, is that we're going to increase funding to these schools. Once again, unresponsive to what this debate is actually about. Publicly funded schools exist under either side of the house. It is about what those structures of the schools actually are. They can't just fiat more funding. not teaching valuable skills, that's when funding actually decreases. We were able to give you a couple of very important mechanisms for why economic mobility is substantially worse. Firstly, in our first speech, we explained why these schools are not likely to be recognized by other kinds of mainstream schools. This was due to the fact that now, when your curriculum is so fundamentally different, which they need in order to access any kind of cultural benefit on the other side of the house, it isn't actually perceived to be part of any mainstream curriculum. No, thank you. This means that when an indigenous person applies to a university, their application is less likely to be accepted because your school is viewed as being less legitimate. When you submit your resume to an employer, they're less likely to hire you because they do not think that you went to a credible school. We get no response to that mechanism in particular. Secondly, though, we explain why there's likely to be a partial prioritization of curriculum on our side of the house, when a lot of programs go to things like cultural languages that are important but can be preserved in other ways. They try to say, and third, that schools have an incentive to be good and provide good services. We agree that their incentive is to do good things, but the problem is the incentives that indigenous leaders have are often wealthier than the remainder of the community, or often disconnected from what people need to survive in the labor market. Rather, people need things like basic language skills. Rather, people need things like basic levels of algebra in order to actually be hired in their later life. So they sabotage the ability of people to access opportunities. This world looks like a world where people are structurally less able to find employment. Insofar as they're scared about choice and locking people into communities, we say it's very important that people are actually able to have a job, which is better on our side of the house than schools are recognized. I'll take your cue off.
You characterize these communities as stupid and not caring for education. We still think that parents want their kids to have a future and teach them maths in those schools. And even if not, we shouldn't force them to, I don't know, practice these
Understood. So firstly, parents are not the ones who are passing these curriculums. Secondly, our claim was never that these leaders are stupid. Our claim was rather that they do care about culture, a priority that can be preserved in other ways, but there are also other priorities like the labor market that are very important and that we have to prioritize on our side as well. Second, them about culture and why we're actually the team who is better able to preserve culture in this realm. The first thing I want to respond to is their framing that groups are going to these schools because they self-selected into caring about culture the most. This argument was successfully taken down in a second when my partner effectively explained that people lack the capacity to ever do things like leave reserves even if they wanted to. We can see that there is discrimination in the labor market. That is precisely why you often can't do things like access a job outside of those reserves, which often costs money to do things like buy a new home and actually create a new kind of life, and the state often structurally locks it into those communities. The next thing that they say is that education is a very important platform to access things like culture because you may do things like face discrimination in mainstream schools. I have a few responses to this. The first thing to say is that the whole strongman about discrimination in schools is really weird. Number one, because you're often still attending schools in your community under our side of the house where the majority of people are still indigenous, so I'm unclear why people are going to hate your culture so much. Number two, even though our case was to offer busing options to allow people to leave other schools, it was never mandatory, it was only an option. Things aren't likely to be so bad in those communities because there are often quite a large number of indigenous people on the peripheries in schools. Also, I know even other kids often don't hate indigenous people as much as their parents. When you have a conversation with someone else in your class, when you were talking about mutual interest in TV shows, I don't think people are likely to hate you and shout out your identity. But secondly, we were very clearly able to explain that we can preserve culture in other ways under our side of the house. We agreed that culture was important. We just said you can have a strong sense of identity. For 7 hours that you were in school, you don't have to be bombarded with culture as well. We spoke about things in a few while. You can have your parents at home doing things like instilling the value of culture and teaching you languages. You can still have things like community festivals that are incredibly valuable. They had to do a lot more legwork to explain why education in particular was the only way that we were actually able to preserve culture because we explained that there are so many other ways you're able to do that. On culture, we were able to explain why their side actually fuels a massive amount of cultural destruction. And second, we characterize what these reserves actually look like. Now, due to the divide and conquer practices used by colonizers, there are ultimately multiple bands living within a single community. They try to respond to this argument by saying, the communities who are assigned these curriculums. We agree, but the problem is there are often distorted power dynamics within these communities where one band is numerically larger or has more economic power than other bands within communities, and then that band is disproportionately going to be the actor who are doing things like shaping curriculums in this community. So what this means is that we don't actually get all indigenous communities learning their own language, learning their own culture, but it's the culture of one band which differs substantially from other bands being forced to other people. This matters substantially for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because we explain why on the comparative, we win culture, because that is better when you have actors who are more intimate to you, like your families, having a larger role in actually shaping that kind of culture. But secondly, they actively fragment and splinter communities when you create high levels of infighting, which we say is literally recolonizing that theme about culture, but secondly, that culture can be accessed in other ways and is better preserved under our side of the house. For all of these reasons, I'm very, very proud to stand in opposition.
Speakers spoke for 8 minutes and 15 seconds, 8:15.
From the beginning of this debate, side opposition tried to create a false comparative. They said that we need to fulfill choice and have schools within these own indigenous communities. But we told you on side opposition that that wasn't this debate today, because those schools exist on either side of the house. The question in this debate was whether those schools had curriculums that were solely in the hands of indigenous leaders who were often the dominant group within that community. We told you the answer to that question was no, because that choice necessarily means you gamble away the future of indigenous peoples. When you have wrong prioritization of skills needed, when you have people not believing that indigenous curriculums are legitimate and that they can be employed within the market. I want to talk about two themes in this speech. First, on economic well-being, and second, about culture. First, on economic well-being. We told you that these schools are unlikely going to be recognized as good or legitimate, and that this is fundamentally different from any other private schools because of the unique perceptions of indigenous peoples. That this is about having cultural leaders, groups that they said were fundamentally different, leading the curriculums, which means that it is very likely that most employers and people will not accept this as a good curriculum because private schools are led by non-indigenous peoples often. This is about a curriculum specifically for that community, led by that community, which means it's very likely going to be undervalued. But then they said these communities still have an incentive to teach them necessary skills for the future. But we said that they can't guarantee that on our side of the house. When you have regular schools that aren't solely under full autonomy of indigenous individuals, you can guarantee that those skills are going to be taught, whereas their side of the house wants a lot of cultural benefits. For a lot of cultural leaders, that may mean prioritizing more language classes over those necessary math and science classes that we talked about from the beginning, which are important in this debate. We told you that even on their best grounds, if these leaders had the incentive to teach those necessary skills, that it's less able to do so when you have less funding for these schools, when you have worse teachers, and that there's an opportunity cost when every other class of culture takes up another important class that we say is necessary for their futures. We told you why that was so critical in this debate, because even on your claims about culture, you aren't able to preserve culture when you can't access job opportunities. You can't pay to stay at a potlatch ceremony. You can't pay to have the solace of a roof over your head or have cultural communities when you're feeling like you're economically destabilized. So we told you that that theme alone is most important in this debate, why they lose that on that ground. But the second theme in this debate was then about who better preserves culture, which was mainly where proposition hung their case. We from the beginning questioned why schools were necessary to preserve culture, especially because family and outside networks can preserve it, if not better, and that would be sacrificed on their side of the house. We told you that not all curriculums are as racist as they say, especially because these schools are within those communities and there's a mixture of indigenous and non-indigenous peoples, which means it's very unlikely to get those, and even if it's the case, that we can fix it as opposed to just create an entirely new curriculum from the scratch, which is incredibly hard. We also told you, which was never engaged with, why they don't have the capacity to implement that kind of choice and culture. That there's so many different kinds of indigenous languages and groups. There are 26 languages in Canada alone, but in each community there's 10s and 20s of different communities. And why the largest group would dominate on their side of the house, stripping choice from all the other more vulnerable indigenous communities. So we said on their best grounds, even if you can get these schools, that the kind of culture represented isn't probably going to represent everyone within these communities, and in fact shut them out from having the quality of education that we think is necessary for their future. We told you that culture is better preserved when you can interact with people outside of your community. That the reason why indigenous languages are dying is because nobody else speaks them. It is harder to get that when you believe that schools already exist to serve culture, and when you can't get mainstream electives of indigenous culture within mainstream treat schools when people don't believe in the value of that culture. So at the end of this debate, we've proven why even on their best grounds about why culture is important, why you're less likely going to get that given the types of communities and leaders leading these curriculums, and given that culture is better preserved when everyone's acknowledged. But most of all, we told you that the future of indigenous peoples is most important in this debate, and it is for those reasons a very positive.
Speaker spoke for 4 minutes and 18 seconds, 418.
So the main purpose of opposition's case has been this. We have a certain amount of funds and we should use it to increase access to things like busing if people want to go to non-community schools. We responded to this in our first speech already. We told you how some people want to go to schools that are run by them, that are autonomously owned by them, and that they say in schools in which they can say how children are being taught. We give those people the opportunity to do that. But the people who want busing, etc., and don't want to go to community-owned schools, I guess we'll then use the funding that we have to give these people the opportunity to go to those schools because we don't have to build these schools for themselves that they can run themselves. They instead can go to those schools, and this group is vastly irrelevant in this debate because they can still get that same benefit on their side because we don't have to use this funding for their schools that they own, but the schools that already exist and these people want to choose. But crucially, there is more funding on our side of the schools that currently don't have much funding, as opposition describes. Because if at the moment we're supporting these people's right to clean drinking water, and now we start supporting their right to education that they choose and run themselves, then I think we'll be able to gather up more political capital and more funding than they at the moment can, where they describe these problems are so big. Otherwise, we couldn't be having this debate. Two things why we win. Firstly, that this is a more justified principle to go by, and secondly, that at a practical level, these children will be better off. Firstly, talk about justification. On the point about reparations, opposition simply says that it doesn't bring any practical benefit. Our argument has always been that we took away these people's agency a long time ago, but we now need to give them this agency back to truly tell us what they want, what is their perspective, what is most important to them. In instances where these practical benefits that these people aspire to and the opposition will be able to give these practical benefits better, and these people can choose those practical benefits instead of their culture. This is a choice these people didn't have hundreds of years ago, and we are now giving them this choice. On the point about parental autonomy, I crucially told you that currently people are forced to choose between bad options. Therefore, their response of parents being able to send their kids to reserve schools already is out of this debate because this is a bad choice at the moment, as they themselves described to you. But moreover, when they tell you that these people have to study the culture of a different community, these are various bands of people. Firstly, this means that they on their side also cannot protect any communal parts of retainment of culture because communities presumably then don't even exist. But moreover, I think that some communities do exist because in their own responses, they say to parental autonomy, they say that these parents can send kids to their community schools and never get these cultural benefits. Therefore, these responses are intention, and if the parental autonomy response was true, then all of our case would be true. But moreover, even if it is different bands, then these are still communities as they have formed over hundreds of years because they were set up while colonial powers existed in those places. But moreover, this is a very comparative to have one band choose something for these people because A, this is a majority of people who now get the better benefits if this is culture that they desire towards. But moreover, it is better for the whole group because they don't have to study about white colonial powers and principles anymore, but rather about the indigenous perspectives, which in general is still better for these communities. On the practical benefits, notice that when they ask us who makes these decisions, because they say we never say this. Thankfully, the motion does. It's indigenous peoples who have autonomy over curriculum operations and educational philosophy. I don't understand their point of confusion. But when they tell you that these kids can get no benefit because they're still seen as weird and everyone discriminates against them, then they say that these people wouldn't be able to get good education in state schools. And it's too late for their whip to respond to this. Moreover, they say that because they obviously haven't responded enough to that point that we make about these kids not succeeding in state schools and therefore not being better off in their side, the response comes too late. But moreover, the Octo 3 explicitly says that these people can stay in the wrong communities, which is in contradiction with their whole case, because if that's true, they get none of the integration benefits they aspire towards throughout their whole bench. Finally, even if this community, we told you that this community is also one success for these people, and therefore don't want to not give them the opportunity of going to university, we'll probably give them some educational benefits as well, in order for these universities to be discriminatory. But note that their whole point about practical benefits is a point about what they think is a benefit for indigenous communities. They have to prove by sustaining culture could never be that practical benefit that these people might want. We give these communities the opportunity to decide what kind of practical benefit they want. They take that choice away. Very happy to.